What if I told you that the Samaritan woman at the well in John 4 and Jacob's only daughter, Dinah, are connected by more than just geography? One story ends in tragedy, and the other one ends in redemption. Both stories take place in the same town, with the same ancestral well. And both stories involve a woman, a man, and a conversation that changes everything. Most people miss this, but once you see it, you'll never read these two stories the same again. Let me show you what I mean. So there are 28 connections between Genesis 34, the defiling of Dinah, and John chapter 4 with the story of the Samaritan woman. I'm going to assume you've read those stories. I would highly recommend, before continuing through this, that you read those. I'm not going to go through them. It would take a long time. I'm not even going to overview them. I'm going to assume, again, that you've read them. So on the left-hand side here, you're going to see the theme or motif that we see throughout both stories. And then in the blue, we have Genesis 34, and the orange, we have John chapter 4. So the first thing we're going to see is the setting. The setting of Shechem in Genesis 34, that's where Dinah is going to be defiled. In John 4, Jesus is traveling through Sychar near Shechem, which is near the plot of land that Jacob is going to give to Joseph. So we're going to see another commonality is Jacob's well. The setting of John 4 and Genesis 34 is where we start. Where we land this is going to be really cool. And so Jacob ends up buying land near Shechem in Genesis 33, right before Dinah is defiled in the next chapter. Whereas in John 4, Jesus meets this woman at Jacob's well near the plot of land that Jacob gave to Joseph. So we're given some points of reference in both stories. Here we see the third commonality between these stories. What they have in common is the daughters of Jacob. So Dinah is Jacob's daughter in Genesis 34 who gets violated. The woman at the well in John chapter 4, she calls Jacob her ancestor. Our father Jacob, our ancestor Jacob. So she identifies as a daughter of Jacob. Now this is going to be very important. The setting, the well, the land, the fact that both are identified as descending from Jacob in some sense. We're going to see fourth, there's an interaction between a man and a woman that goes beyond just conversation. You're going to see. So in Genesis 34, Shechem sees Dinah and seizes her. He initiates, right? Well, Jesus initiates the dialogue in John 4 with the Samaritan woman. And in the midst of that, there is another commonality, is cultural tension. So Jacob's sons, we're going to see at the end of Genesis 34, Shechem and his father are going to say, what do we need to do to get your daughter to marry Shechem? And Jacob's sons will say, oh, we can't marry foreigners. We need to have your son circumcised, right? So there is that cultural tension. And in John chapter 4, there's cultural tension between the Jews and the Samaritans. That's obvious within the conversation. We're going to see defilement. So in Genesis 34, Dinah is defiled by Shechem. In John 4, this doesn't necessarily note the same kind of defilement, but it's at least potentially a kind of social shame or some kind of inner shame. This woman has had multiple husbands, and the woman she's now with is not even her husband. We're going to see that both women are found alone. In Genesis 34, Dinah goes out alone, kind of pounced upon by Shechem. And then in John chapter 4, she comes to the well, the woman, at noon, and boom, Jesus initiates. In both stories, there's a desire for more. So in Genesis 34, Shechem desires Dinah. He wants to marry her. First of all, he wants to sleep with her. Then he defiles her. Then he wants to marry her. So there's this desire for what comes from Jacob, right? His daughter. Well, in John 4, Jesus, a descendant of Jacob, is offering living water. And the woman says, I want that. Like, give me that. There's this desire, this unmet need, or perceived need, rather. There's a unifying of the people, a kind of union. So in Genesis 34, the sons of Jacob, the brothers of Dinah, they're like, we're not going to let our sister marry your son unless you guys circumcise. Then we'll unite our people. Shechem goes back with that news, says, we're going to unite and take all their stuff. In John 4, Jesus speaks of really what unites the people of God, the true people of God. They worship in spirit and truth, right? So it's not about two mountains or what geographical place or who do you descend from. It's about worshiping the Father in spirit and truth. That's what unites. And we'll see in John 10, the sheepfold, those who are of the fold, who versus those who have not yet been brought into the fold, this uniting of sheep. And then the well becomes a meeting place. not just a place, but here, this in Genesis 34, the well signifies kind of a transitional space in the story of Jacob and his children. In John 4, the well is a kind of betrothal slash meeting place typically in that culture. We see that in Genesis 28 with Jacob meeting, or not Genesis 28, Genesis 32, when he meets Rachel. And so the well can be a place of betrothal or meeting, but here for this woman, it's a transitional point in her life in the sense that she's about to meet the Messiah and bring good news back. There's a sense of violence and peace, rather a contrast here. So in Genesis 34, we're going to see that Simeon and Levi massacre the men of Shechem. They bring violence and death upon that region. Jesus, in that same region, is going to bring peace. He's going to stay in the town and bring the good news and stay there and bring life. There's a sense of male initiative. As we saw, Shechem takes initiative. Jesus initiates the conversation. There's a sense of false versus true union. So in Genesis 34, there's a deceptive kind of presentation of this union, but it's through coercion and deceit. In John 4, there's a real, legitimate spiritual union being offered by Jesus through the living water. You can come and be a part of what God is doing, His kingdom, drink from this water, worship in spirit and truth, that kind of thing. Hey, if you don't know me, my name is Jason, and you can find everything about this ministry on AboveReproachMinistry.com. All of our Bible resources, our online church, ways to support this ministry, and so much more. And if you live anywhere near Spartanburg, South Carolina, come check out our church on Sundays at 10 a.m. Also, I have 2 brief updates for those of you that are part of this community. Number 1, the revision of my book Fruitful is coming out soon, hopefully in the next few weeks. So be sure to grab a copy of that when it does release. And number 2, we now have options on our website for monthly support. And when you become part of our monthly support team, you get access to all of our exclusive teachings and videos that get released every week. This is just my way of saying thank you. All right, that's all I got for you. Let's get back to the video. There's this sense in which the men are away when something happens. So Jacob, he receives news about his daughter being defiled while his sons are in the field. Then they come back in here. In John 4, Jesus engages the woman while his disciples are out in the town getting food. So both stories present the absence of the men. And then there is an outcome to both situations. Again, with Genesis 34, it ends in violence, shame, and death. Whereas Jesus seems to flip that in John 4, and it ends in Samaritans believing, life and peace and restoration. There's a community response or reaction. So Shechem brings news back to the community, and he essentially says, hey, let's take all their stuff and just let's do what they want. And then in John 4, it's not a man who's sent back to the community, but a woman who brings news of Jesus as the potential Messiah back to her community. So one is bringing news of a kind of deception, and in the other, John 4, she's bringing truth, transformative truth. There's a transformation of a woman in both stories. So after Dinah is defiled and then kind of not given a husband, she disappears from the story in shame and fades into the background. Whereas in John 4, there seems to be a kind of redemption of that, where this woman of Samaria brings news and becomes a witness. So her identity, her role rather, changes from just getting water to bringing living water to her town from this Messiah that she's encountered. Both are private encounters in the open, which is kind of weird when you think about it. Private encounters in the open. Yeah, they're one-on-one exchanges, but in open spaces. So Dinah encounters Shechem in the open when she's away from her home. And then this woman leaves her home to go and get water, encounters Jesus in private. There's a sense in which the people receiving the news listen to the messenger. And so the city hears Shechem's message. They respond and say, sure, let's do it. They all get circumcised. Bad things happen. In John 4, the town actually hears the woman's testimony. And they come out and they end up saying, it's not because of what you said anymore, but because we've heard the Messiah. There's this sense of covenant language. So Genesis 34, hey, we'll have a covenant with these foreigners. In John 4, Jesus is initiating or setting into motion or preparing the people for this new covenant where they will worship in spirit and truth. There is a sense of defilement versus cleansing. So in Genesis 34, it's physical and social defilement. In John chapter 4, Jesus crosses the ethnic and kind of gender norms of that culture to encounter and engage this woman. That's the breaking social boundaries. There's a physical and social defilement in Genesis 34, and then Jesus brings living water that purifies and restores. And then both stories involve breaking social boundaries. So circumcision is that kind of cultural boundary between the Hebrew people in formation and then the other, Gentiles. And then with Jesus, he crosses that and engages this woman, not only a woman, but a Samaritan woman. There's a concern for reputation in both stories. So Jacob worries about his family's reputation in the end. You've made me stink in this land. I'm small. And then when the disciples come back, see Jesus talking to the Samaritan woman, the disciples question Jesus' actions in their hearts, but they never really ask, what are you doing? Why are you talking to her? They seem to trust Jesus. And so there's a sense in which both reputations seem to be on the line. Like, Jesus, you're engaging this Samaritan woman. What's happening? Divine timing. So on the third day after the men in Genesis 34 had been circumcised, the third day after they were circumcised, Simeon and Levi brought violence and attacked the men. Whereas in John 4, verse 6, Jesus, on the third day coming out of the grave after dying, brings life and salvation. So there's a reversal. And Jesus ends up staying a few days longer in that place. There's societal honor, or versus dishonor. In Genesis 34, the family and their name is violated, right? The honor is violated. And in John chapter 4, Jesus honors the woman and that city with his stay in presence by staying longer. And then we have God's chosen partner. Shechem wants, again, what comes from Jacob, his daughter. Jacob being the chosen partner God is working with in Genesis in that section. And then in John chapter 4, Jesus is the true offspring of Jacob that we're awaiting, right? And this woman wants the living water that comes through Jesus, which is another way of saying what comes through Jacob. There's both stories, a desire for what comes through God's chosen partner. And then at the end, we see here, number 28, there's this focus on the numbers. So with Jacob, at the end, he fears because of his small numbers. He sees it kind of as him and his family versus the nations. And Jesus, on the other hand, in John 4, he doesn't see himself as being in opposition to the nations, but he's concerned with the harvest needing more workers to save the nations. So whereas in Jacob's story, it's kind of his numbers at odds with the surrounding nations. I'm small, they're big. Jesus doesn't view the world like that. His plan includes the nations. His sacrifice is for the nations. And he's concerned with numbers to get the nations, not fight against the nations. So those are 28 different connections between John chapter 4 and Genesis 34. Of course, just starting with the setting, the place, the encounter, and then you begin to build from there. And if you're a monthly supporter on our website, thank you guys. One of the ways that I want to say thank you is by giving these spreadsheets that I have in these videos to you for free in downloadable PDF form. So you can go ahead and check that out on the website. It will be accessible to you guys. And if you'd like access to these spreadsheets and these different files that I use and show in the videos, by joining our monthly support team, you'll get access to them. So thank you guys for your support and for making this ministry possible. And let me know what stood out to you in the comments. I'd love to know your thoughts, questions, concerns, anything else that you noticed, insights, other connections. I'm sure these stories are connected beyond just these things, but this is just what I noticed. So thanks for watching. I'll see you guys in the next video. Hey, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more biblical content just like this. We have hundreds of videos, but you might be most interested in these ones right here. Also, visit our website for all of our free resources and classes. And thank you so much for partnering with us financially to make this ministry even possible. Keep moving towards Jesus, and I'll see you in the next video.